The title of the Child Welfare Virtual Expo Session 6 is Looking Inside, Considerations and Approaches to Understanding and Implementing Normalcy Through the Congregate Care Lens.
Hi, welcome back. We hope you have enjoyed your interactive chat session. And my name is Tracy Tippett. I'm Program Area Manager for the Center for States. And just as a reminder, if you can see us but you can't hear us, be sure to turn up your speakers. Right now, I'd like to turn it over to Brandon Schlosser.
Brandon is a young adult consultant at the Center for States.
Hi, everyone. My name is Brandon. I am 22 years old, and I grew up in congregate care. I'm currently going to the University at Albany in New York State for Japanese studies. I would like to just share with you guys a short monologue about just a chapter of my life in one of my congregate care settings. I would like to begin by saying that what you're about to hear is my personal experience in a congregate care setting and not inclusive of the varying experiences that other youth in the foster care system possess. I also want to stress the importance that many youth who reside in our country's foster care system aren't there because of something they did, but they're there because of something that happened to them. I would now like to share with you some of my experiences. Now, when I say my time in foster care, some people may think of a nostalgic sense of looking back into the past. And in many ways, it was a time that I did things that I never would have dreamed of doing, such as climbing an actual rock face and spelunking in a flooding underground cavern to just going to the movies. However, these times were scarce compared to how I felt throughout my everyday life. Beginning in 2008, I entered foster care by living in a congregate care facility. This was when I was given all the clothes I may need, which consisted of 2 articles of clothing, house, and shower shoes. I want to point out that these were not ordinary footwear. They are the exact same shoes that are given to prisoners. After being shown my room, which was bare and surrounded by pale cinder block walls, I was given a very large binder filled with rules and regulations which required me to stop being me and start being who I was mandated to be. Every day was structured by the minute, which was focused more on getting us through the day and not supporting my well-being. 7 a.m. to 7:03, get up and adjust. 7:03 to 7:08, perform hygiene, which included things like brushing my teeth, washing my face, and using the restroom. Everything was planned out, and we were herded en masse through almost every aspect of our lives. We did get 2 hours a day to have free time, air quotes, where we can talk with our peers in a common place. There were also about 3 hours of recreation per day, which was still chosen and monitored by all the facility staff. This was the only time during the day where I felt closest to feeling a sense of normalcy, and yet it never really truly felt normal. A level system was also in place, which, depending on our ability to follow all the rules, would dictate what privileges we had. Examples of these privileges included the ability to even spend time outside of our rooms and enjoy a meal with the other residents, which most people would identify as just a normal activity. I remember a time where a group of staff members had a bet going to see who would be able to catch me breaking the rules, just so they could write me up and drop my level, because I was always very careful to follow all the rules. Even though I was careful to follow the rules, the staff members would continuously threaten to put me on restriction and limit my privileges. It was like a game. During my time spent in this residential setting, I saw many residents get restrained because staff members thought of us as objects to control instead of young people to care for. I also saw many staff overreact in their use of discipline because they allowed their personal issues to affect their work. When we went anywhere on campus outside of our housing unit, we were numbered and forced to walk in straight lines. I can recall several times when we were forced to walk for hours because our formation wasn't straight enough according to the staff's expectations. One very clear memory I have was when we walked for 2 hours with our hands straight out ahead and endured ridicule from the staff who would laugh and call it the zombie walk because there wasn't uniform spacing between us all. Now, you may think that I'm being overdramatic or my view is only one-sided. Let me assure you of something. I was absolutely broken during this time. Everything that I held dear and my own moral standards did not matter. I needed to learn a new set of morals, a new sense of self, and a new sense of right and wrong for fear of being restrained. Due to this complete overhaul of self, I truly believed that the staff knew what was absolutely best for me. I lived my life every day trying to be this perfect, well-rounded citizen, and they only wanted me to be for a means of control. Some staff cared, but most saw herding youth as their day job. Coming up on almost 2 years now from leaving care, as an adult, I've had a hard reality check. This is not some smack in the face like, oh snap, I have to pay all my bills. It was like everything I am is a lie. Everything I know has been fabricated. Everything and everyone I trust had been the product of systematic attempt to steer youth toward a life that may be statistically the quote-unquote best, but is not subjectively the best. Money isn't everything. I have been with my boyfriend for almost 2 years now, and our relationship has suffered greatly due to all of this baggage. As I begin living my life as a quote-unquote normal human being, I am slowly undoing the trauma rooted from my lived experience, which has since resulted in me being diagnosed with PTSD. I know I am in for a long ride, and had I been treated like a person and not as a number or a statistic forcefully shoved down a path that objectively is my quote-unquote best chance of success, but instead compassionately nurtured, my sense of overall well-being would be greater than where it stands today. From what my life has proven, the quote-unquote best isn't always the best. Now, I would like to thank everyone for letting me read this to you guys. I hope it helped you understand and see something from more of an inside, the inside scoop, I guess I'll say. Now, I would like to turn it over to James, who will share his work and what he's done to improve congregate care settings for young people. Hey, James.
Hey, thanks for sharing your story. I'm honored to be a part of this, and I admire your willingness to kind of share your experiences about being in congregate care. My name is James Lister. I'm the executive director of the Plummer Home. It's a nonprofit child welfare organization in Massachusetts that does congregate care, residential services, foster care, and community-based services. But today I'm speaking to you from the lens strictly of congregate care and residential treatment. But I want to start by talking about the concept and the idea of child welfare, right? And to keep in mind that childhood is finite, right? It ends at a certain point in time and we turn into an adult. And every day that a child grows up in the child welfare system, we're taking a day away from their childhood. So we have a responsibility to always be doing one of three things when we're working with kids in child welfare. When possible, to keep them home safely. And if we can't do that and they're out of the home, that we need to return them home as soon as we can safely. And if we can't return them home, we need to find them home. And that is how, at the end of the day, we're really going to achieve normalcy.
I agree.
Now, when kids are with us in out-of-home placements, foster care or congregate care, we have a responsibility to do things that are normal, right? Kids should not have shower shoes, right? You talked about shower shoes. You talked about a book of rules and regulations. You talked about privileges being taken away from you, such as eating with your peers and friends. And you talked about being treated as a person and not a number. I am a dad of 3 young boys, and my house is chaos all the time, no question. But there are no shower shoes, there are no written rules and regulations, and people don't feel they're treated as numbers. So I think it's really, really important that while kids are with us, to the extent possible, we try to create a milieu and a setting where kids feel like they're growing up with normal. And so at Plummer Home, where I work now, I've been there for 11 years, and probably the first 4 or 5 years, we really tried to get focused on tightening up and improving the residential program. And a big part of that was creating, to the extent possible, normalcy. And one of the first things we did was we had a 12-passenger van. And everybody knew, the high school knew it was the Plummer Home van.
I know that feeling.
So we got rid of that. We have a couple regular minivans, not that they think those are cool by any stretch, but we have minivans, and we also have some small SUVs. So when we pick kids up from school, they feel that they're actually being picked up kind of like in a family setting.
I remember like lots of times that I would go out on rec and just everyone say, oh, they're from LaSalle or they're from whatever agency you're with, and just the kind of looks that we would get because all the staff would wear badges, and
that's right.
It's almost like we're on furlough as opposed to going and just enjoying bowling.
That's right.
Yeah, I understand.
And then when we had the 12-passenger van, the kids would ask that we drop them off around the corner.
Yeah.
so they could walk up. So there are a lot of things we can do as congregate care providers to make the experience more normal. We raise money to do things like have camping trips for kids. We have one young man that's with us now that just found out he made the football team, and he needed cleats and all sorts of gear. We don't call the social worker and ask for them to kind of come up with the money because we know it's going to be a phone call, it'll be a process that may or may not happen. We go out right away and we get cleats, and we get normal cleats that the other kids have. We don't go to, the used sports store.
Very nice.
Something else that we do as an organization is every year when we develop our budget, we put capital money aside that the kids can decide what to do.
Really?
So, and it's generally in the tune of $2,500 to $5,000, and you'd be amazed with the stuff that they come up with.
Now that's for like the large group of.
To improve the building, the facility.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So oftentimes you have staff, senior staff, and what it used to be, sitting up in my office deciding that the bathroom needed to be refinished or that this needed to be done. And then the kids had a very different perspective around what needed to be done. And so that we give them a voice around doing some of those projects. We also, and I'm very proud to say this, we have 2 board members that are former residents. One gentleman who was on our board about 20 years ago, who was in a residence about 20 years ago, and then one board member who was at Plummer Home when I was hired. So it's fascinating to have that perspective when we're talking about budgets and strategic planning and governance and oversight. It's critical, and it's really important to have that perspective.
Absolutely.
And another thing that we do, when we hire staff, the final stage of your interview process is being interviewed by the kids, right? So if you don't make the cut of the kids, you don't get hired. So they meet with, it's usually senior staff, then they meet with like mid-level supervisors, and then they go and they have kind of a informal meeting interview with the kids to make sure they're comfortable. And I'm telling you, they're so good at identifying genuine, sincere staff. And we joke, we say that they can sniff out a fraud a mile away. And I think it's really true, because since we started doing that, our staff selection and team has gotten much, much stronger.
Now, James, do you mind if I ask you just a quick question about that? Because I'm really curious. Yeah. I just want to know what happens if the youth say this isn't a good choice, like a good.
I think we'd have conversations with them to learn more about it, and if they ultimately weren't comfortable with it, we wouldn't move forward. And so I think when you start employing some of these practices, you got to be careful and walk the fine line of tokenism, right? You don't want to just do it to get their perspective. If you're going to do it, you need to do it in a meaningful, authentic
Absolutely.
way. Yeah.
And I love that. I think that's a really great idea.
Yeah.
I wish that that was going on around me.
They're better at picking out staff than I am, we've found out. So I want to transition us to a polling question. And our first polling question for the audience is, do you think your agency is supportive of youth-driven policies? And the answers options are A, yes, B, no, and C, somewhat. So again, the question is, do you think your agency is supportive of youth-driven policies? And when you answer that question, I want you to keep in mind that notion of tokenism, real, authentic, youth-driven policies. So take a few minutes and we'll wait and get some responses. But I want to just comment for a minute about the authenticity part of it, because I think that's really important.
Absolutely.
I think sometimes you put somebody on staff that has lived experience for 10, 12 hours a week. You put them in at a time that it's real easy to manage. And so it takes a cultural commitment around the whole idea of youth-driven policies and stuff.
I think that sense of like empathy and compassion that a staff member who has had lived experience is extremely important. Like they're not just kids that you have to babysit. It's like you would understand, or at least try to understand, what exactly that youth is going through.
Right.
It's not an easy thing to go through congregate care or in the foster system in general. So there really should be a lot of love, compassion, empathy going in,
right,
and keeping in mind when you're hiring staff.
And I think it's got to be an organizational commitment to that effort.
Yes,
as well. It simply just can't be a shift supervisor or a program director or something. So we have some questions coming in. Are these the final numbers that we have, or are we gonna? Okay, so it's rolling. So we'll check back in on that in a minute. But in the meantime, Brendan, I don't know about you, but I hope some of the participants out there are on a beach somewhere sunny on their phone watching this.
Yeah, right.
All right, so the polling question or the answer, do you think your agency is supportive of youth-driven policies? 30% said yes.
Amazing. Good job, guys.
7% said no, and 63% said somewhat. So I think that's really important to know, and I think that 63% number is important, because I'm sure it's a wide range, right, of what, to what extent that people are really putting those policies together. But I think it's live and it's real, and people know about it, and people talk about it, and people value it, and I think it's really a process over time of getting to a place where we really need to be, and things like this are helpful to that effort. I'm gonna give me 1 second here. I want to talk a little bit about Plummer Home and our transformation from about 5 or 6 years ago of being a relatively generic or typical group home to one that is now permanency driven. And it is my belief anyways that normalcy can only be achieved in the context of a loving, permanent family forever, and that we have a responsibility as a congregate care provider to get there. And historically, and again, I'm talking about older youth here. Historically, I think what we've done as a child welfare organization, I think in the field in general, is looked at older kids that don't have families and accept the notion that they don't want family, they don't want to return to family, their families aren't available for them, older people aren't interested in adopting older youth, so on and so forth. And we began to challenge that notion about 5 years ago and say that anyone that comes to our congregate care programs is capable and should have family. And so we created an intervention model really with 3 elements to that. There's permanency, the idea that kids should have loving families forever. There's preparedness, the idea that kids should develop skills, have good solid education, independent living skills, social skills, and then community. Kids should be connected to the community in a positive and meaningful way. So permanency, preparedness, and community are the 3 driving forces of our treatment. But I think what separates us from many other providers is the idea of permanency, right? So we have been so focused on these kids don't have family, they can't have family, so let's do everything we can in our power to get them ready to live on their own. And I look back at my own experience being a social worker, working in programs, working for the state as a state social worker, having conversations with kids that are 15, 16 years old saying, look, you've been dealt a bad hand of cards. It just is what it is. I haven't, and you have. And the best thing that we can do for you is to wrap around as many services as possible and to give you the skills that you need to transition successfully into adulthood. That's the best we can do for you. You got a raw deal. Let's do the best we can. Let's support you the best we can. And that wasn't enough, right? That just wasn't and is not enough. And the idea that kids can transition, or grow up without a family, it was not really reasonable to ask. So we transformed our entire kind of practice to get focused around not only developing and building skills, because you can never lose sight of that, but to also try to get kids connected to family. So it's been a real positive kind of transformation for us as an organization. And to put that really into perspective, back in 2009, our mission statement was, vision statement. And keep in mind, when you think about a vision statement, that's your pie in the sky, right? That's your dream. And vision statements are generally very lofty, right? So clean water for everyone, end world hunger. Those are vision statements. Yes. And so our vision statement back in 2009 was a community committed to providing all children the support necessary to successfully navigate to adulthood, right? So that we wanted back then, the best thing, the pie in the sky dream for all older kids in foster care was that they had a community committed to helping them transition to adulthood. Well, we changed our vision statement last year, and now it's every young person has a family unconditionally committed to nurture, protect, and guide them to successful adulthood. So it's not the child welfare system's responsibility to transition kids to adulthood, right? It's the child welfare system to find kids, safe, loving family that do that job. And too often we see, at least in Massachusetts and in my particular program, too often we see kids come to us at age 15, 16 years old, And when they come to us at intake, social workers will often say the plan for Johnny is to be in your group home until he can transition to your step-down program, which is a pre-independent living program, and then to your supported apartment program in the community. And if things are going well at 18, they can sign on until age 22. But when you think about it, right, here's a treatment team getting behind a 7-year plan, right, for a 15-year-old to be raised by the child welfare system. So we really kind of push back on that notion and say that the child welfare system is not meant to be a parent, and in fact is not a good parent, right? That the child welfare system's job is to get kids back to safe family that can do those things that are important.
I agree. And if worse does come to worse, and there is no liable place for these young people to go, how to nurture their sense of self and their self-worth and self-esteem. Because I know that I was provided many programs while I was in care. You know, I was in the SILP program, the off-campus department, and I have a lot of financial skills and everything, and I've learned so much. But at the same time, it's not really helping me, because if I don't love myself and I don't feel like I'm worth all of this effort, then what's going on? You know what I'm saying?
Right, skill development alone is not enough.
Yeah, so really just nurture the youth, nurture the young person, because it's not just about their financial success, it's about who they are and their well-being. You know, I always use Maslow's hierarchy of needs to evaluate to evaluate the status of their well-being. You know, they want to be loved, they want to have friends, you know, like family, everything. Yeah, so it's not just about the skills, but it's everything.
Right. How can one reasonably be expected to focus on education and money and stuff when some of those more basic needs aren't met, right?
Absolutely.
Right.
Yes.
So I'm going to bring us to our second polling question. And that question is, has your agency found it difficult to implement policies in congregate care settings? Again, these are normalcy policies. So has your agency found it difficult to implement policies in congregate care settings? And the answer options are A, yes, B, no, and C, somewhat.
So just go ahead and start plugging away at those, and we'll see what the results spawn. So do you have any thoughts about this question?
Yeah, I mean, there are some hard policies that you can put together, right? Like you can say that our board is going to require that 2 seats are people with lived experience, for example. And so that's a big part of it. But I think the other part of the question is it's got to be a cultural kind of commitment. You know, it's got to be a shift in mindset. I think policy is a good starting point, you know, to kind of just to demonstrate that the organization values it as a priority. But I think it can be difficult to do too.
Absolutely. I'm sure that there are so many barriers with this, you know, including like liability, I've heard is a big one, you know, financial need, funding, everything. It's just really difficult, but it needs to be done. It's worth it. I mean, these are lives, you know, so it's worth it.
Great. So we have some numbers coming in now. So again, the question is, has your agency found it difficult to implement policies around normalcy and congregate care settings? And so we have 46% saying yes, 6% saying no, and 49% saying somewhat. And I think that it's no small task to kind of create a culture that promotes normalcy. So I'm not surprised that yes number is as high as it is, and that the no number is so low.
Yeah, but I'm actually kind of interested to see, like, what about those people that said no, like, what exactly was done, and, you know,
right.
Why was it easy, or easier, I should say, you know?
So I'm going to move us now to an interactive activity, and there's going to be 3 questions. I think we'll do 1 question at a time. And the first question is, how do you engage youth to drive policy development? So the first question is, how do you engage youth to drive policy development?
A pause while the audience answers the question.
And the audience out there should type in your answers, and then we'll field some of these answers and comment on them. Now, I'm sure we can't get to all of them, but if you could send your answers, we'd be happy to respond.
A pause while the audience answers the question.
In your experience, was there even discussion about kind of the idea and concept of normalcy in the programs that you've been in?
Honestly, there was very little. I brought it up, and most of my congregate care settings said that they're completely for it, 100% support it, but didn't really see any action. So it wasn't until I actually worked for my state's Office of Children and Family Services when I started to really try to knuckle down on my agency, which I was in a really unique situation because I had some power. So
Right.
I was able to kind of influence a little bit, and things were starting to go in the right direction. But it is a push because, you know, people are just comfortable doing what they've always done.
Right.
So you have to really just nudge them and just say, you know what, it's worth it. Just go.
Right.
You know.
It's a different mindset, definitely, and I always come back to long stays in child welfare. The longer you stay in child welfare, the harder it is to actually achieve normalcy.
What was the question again? I'm sorry.
The activity question is, how do you engage youth to drive policy development? And some examples of that are to have them be part of the process, have youth advocates. We talked about some of this earlier. Like I said, at our organization, we have 2 or 3 staff that are floor staff, direct care staff that have lived experience in congregate care settings. We have 2 board members that have done that.
I think that's amazing,
Right.
James.
Do we have any other questions up here to respond to or answers? Okay.
All right, so it seems that some answers are going to be starting to come in.
Should we move to the next question? Okay. The next question here are, what are some of the challenges or barriers you have found in trying to implement normalcy within the congregate care facilities in your state? Again, the question is, what are some of the challenges or barriers you have found in trying to implement normalcy within the congregate care facilities in your state?
Some of these examples might be, like I said before, the liability issues and the funding issues. Those are the 2 biggest ones that I've seen working federally and with the states. But I'm sure that there's a whole plethora of barriers that we have to try to overrun.
Right. I think this is a great question because normalcy is the right thing to do for kids in congregate care, but it's not necessarily the easiest thing to get to, particularly if you're starting from a place where it doesn't exist. And I look at a lot of my experience. I was a social worker for the state. I've worked in several different residential programs across several different levels of care. And I just remember some core principles like being consistent, right, is so important. But when I really look at some of that consistency, the messaging around consistency that I was taught wasn't really about individualizing treatment, right? So all kids had to do this at X, and this was, and so the idea of, I think what's challenging is a staff feel like they lose a sense of control, right? When you are giving up, where you're transitioning to more of a normal like environment. I remember one residential program that I had worked at early in my career, and we were told when we were to ask a young person to do something, and if they said they couldn't do it, we would tell them that they failed to earn points, right? Because it was a point and level system. And so we would say, actually, as a child welfare professional, Johnny, you have failed to earn, right? And kids were failing to earn all day long. And if they continued to not listen, we'd ask them to go to a timeout room. And if they go to a timeout room, then when they go there, we'd process. If they didn't go to the timeout room, we'd tell them that by not listening to our staff direction, you're not being safe. So we're going to help move you to the timeout room. So we would, at that point, we would take gloves, put our gloves on. These are traumatized kids, keep in mind. Put our gloves on and go to grab them, move them to the timeout room. And if they didn't cooperate, then it would ultimately end up in a restraint, right? And we were just taught that these were the quote-unquote tools in our toolbox to kind of manage the kids. So if you create an environment that is truly about normalcy, you're really taking most of those tools out of the staff's toolbox.
It can be scary for the staff
right.
too.
And I think I'd imagine it's really difficult to transition from a traditional milieu environment like that. Okay, so here's some of the answers we have from the audience are lack of financial support.
Yep.
Right. I mean, there are some cost impact to creating change. The commitment from leadership, and I think that's really key. Right. There might be some old school residential professionals that aren't really willing to think differently about the milieu and the structure of the program, right? In fact, I remember when kids would push back on reasoning behind rules, we were just told to tell them it was because of the structure of the program, right? So when I was a brand new staff and, well, how come I can't go to the fridge and get whatever? I would say structure of the program. And we were all told to say that, right? So
this is so interesting, James. James, because it's ringing a bell so clearly. This is exactly what I've been through. You know, I've seen all those restraints happen. I've seen all these generic responses, but like, where's the compassion? Like, yeah, you're right. We're already traumatized. We're going through a crappy hand, and why are we being forced down all these paths that really, honestly, clearly aren't that good for us? You know, like I have PTSD from this, and the staff are saying that this is safe.
right.
No, you're harming the youth.
Right. So it's really, truly a shift in mindset, I think.
Absolutely.
Another just great point here from the audience are the licensing obstacles, right? So even at Plummer Home, when we started to shift our milieu to be one that's more individualized, we lost a sense of control, right? I mean, it wasn't so much as if you don't do this right now, and I'm going to be coercive and unintentionally confrontational, it led to incidents. So when we shifted our behavior management system from a point and level system to, for those of you that are familiar with collaborative problem solving, right? It's a very, very different approach, but it led to a little bit of a more chaotic milieu. And our licensing agency came in, and so when we put that CPS approach in place, I invited our state licensing partners to come be a part of it, right? Mm-hmm. So they could see we're thinking about business differently. We're going to work with our kids' behaviors differently. And so I started getting buy-in from them right away. Well, we had a couple incidents, and what they had said to us, they called a big meeting and said, well, maybe that new policy that you have, maybe that new approach is a little too loose, right? So I do think that those are real.
Yeah.
Those are real obstacles and barriers.
And you know, I'm just like thinking back to my experience. A lot of the frustration from the young people and that aggression towards the staff was due to because the youth didn't trust the staff because they wouldn't let them do anything that was even remotely seen as normal. So if you just have those small risks, this is another answer, the small risks lead to trust building. I think that's extremely accurate. Later on in my congregate career, I guess you could say, I went to a place where we were actually able to walk around the campus. Like if we wanted to go and get meds or go to the cafeteria, we didn't actually have to go in lines. We just walked as a group, and we had these things called outs where we could just kind of go to the library. We had to get it approved, of course, which was less normal, but it was much more normal than some of my other placements. And some of the respect that the staff got for letting all these youth do that was just amazing. And there was trust, and that's how you grow. But if it keeps going this way, it's only going to get worse. Right. So, yeah.
I'm going to bring us to our last activity question here. And how does your agency engage family to achieve normalcy? Right? How does your agency engage family to achieve normalcy? And I'll just comment a little bit about what we do at Plummer Home as the answers are coming in. We get kids oftentimes coming to us with goals of APLA, an alternative permanent planned living arrangement, right?
That's me.
They're 14, 15-year-old kids, right? And we're pushed to do family engagement. It's written through all of our contracts. It's a buzz term. It's engaging families, engaging families. Well, our kids come to us without families.
Yep.
And the responsibility on the entire child welfare system and all the associated providers are to find family. So you can't engage family without family, right? So we have really driven our organization to be all about finding family. And there have been several cases where a young man comes to us, older adolescent comes to us, and we start doing some family finding. And we realized that he has a godmother that lives 3 miles away that assumed he was happily adopted in a family 10, 12 years ago, right? People stop looking for family, for kids often. We had another young man that came to us at age 16, and he was at another residential program for 5 or 6 years. Three months into his placement, we found his biological mother in Pennsylvania, who was safely parenting with no child welfare involvement, 5 kids. And everyone at that program operated on the assumption, right, that this kid is not ready, able, or doesn't have family. So that's a real critical part of it. I want to bring normalcy back to family, right? Because that's really, I think, the key point that we need to make here, that normalcy can really only be achieved in the context of family. But let's just see some of the answers coming in from the family visit policies. This is a great answer from the audience, right? The residential program doors should be open to family almost any time.
I agree.
And when it works for family and when it's best for family. It's not about contingent upon behavior of the kids. It's not about what's convenient for the staff. It's not about the schedule of the program. That just really needs to be almost held harmless access to family at any point in time. Back to what I said earlier, your childhood is finite, right? And every day that kids spend growing up in child welfare, we're taking a day away from their childhood, right? So family visits can't be pushed off till next week because things aren't going well, or a monthly visit can't go another month. Because if you're 16 years old, you only have 24 months left of your childhood, right, that we owe back to them and to get back to family. Don't restrict access to cell phones. This one I think is very, very critical. Kids come to Plummer Home, and they're allowed to have their cell phone on day one, no question. Now, if you start doing really dumb things with it, which definitely happens, definitely happens, then we restrict the use of it, right? Because that's what parents would do in those situations.
Absolutely.
I think that's a great point from the audience.
You know, and I think that also applies to internet access and other mobile devices, such as like social media and Facebook and other things. So it's not just, like who you call or who you text, but it's access to the internet. I didn't even have my first phone until I think I was 18.
Right.
That definitely ostracized me.
Right, and they know we assume they're going to make bad decisions, and that's a bad message to start off when you come to a residential program.
You know, James. I also I always say that the youth need the freedom to fail, because if they're just set on that path to where they're just coddled and protected and safe, they're not going to learn how to pick themselves back up. So they have to, go through a breakup. They have to spend money that they don't have. They have to do, all these things. They have to get hurt playing football or riding whatever. That's how they're going to learn, oh, I don't want to do that. That's a bad idea. And then you'll start seeing a lot more cooperation because they'll get through their head. It was like, oh, I get why you don't want me to do that, or I get why this is a bad idea or a good idea, and work it out together. It's not just I'm directing you to go clean that toilet. Why?
Right. So we have a few minutes left to open it up for kind of general questions. So we had some very specific questions that we asked. We have a few more minutes, so if there are any questions you'd like us to answer, please feel free to send those in.
Either James or me, Brandon. We welcome just about any question, within reason.
So to talk about our kind of family push again, last summer we had 6 young men that came to us, 6 young men that went home to family. And all 6 of them came to us within the prior year with a goal to come to our group home, step down to our supervised apartment program, and step down to our independent living program. And that was the plan at intake, was to do that kind of process or sentence, if you will, that I've talked about earlier. And all 6 of those kids went home to family. And none of them came to us with the idea that they would leave us to go to family.
All right, so I think that we're going to be available after this to talk about and answer any more questions. All right.
And we'll be able to field some questions via the social media after this as well.
So we have actually some more questions. How did it feel to transition from congregate care?
That's probably for you.
Yeah, I would assume. Well, it was really rough, to be honest. How do I explain this? You know when you're kind of kicked out of your parents' house and you just realize that you have to be like an adult, and you know how people struggle through that for years? Well, it's like that times like 50, because not only do you have to learn how to be an adult, but you have to learn that what you may have been taught isn't necessarily normal, and you know, like your way of thinking is very different from other people. Because I know that I'm very therapeutic now, but whenever I try to use the therapeutic method with people, it just makes them angrier because they don't know what I'm doing. But all right, and then
Got another question here.
and then we are all set. What?
To introduce the commissioner.
Yes. Okay. I actually don't have the thing anymore. Okay. Well, thank you all for your time. I really appreciate you coming out here, and I would like to introduce the commissioner, Rafael Lopez. He does so much great work, and I hope you enjoy him.
Commissioner of the Administration on Children, Youth, and Families.
Thank you, Brandon. It's wonderful to be here with all of you virtually. You know, one of the things that's really exciting about this first ever Child Welfare Virtual Expo is that there are people from all over the country and territories joining us. We have some over 500 people joining us today from 52 states and territories, counties, and tribes. People who work in child welfare specifically in social work, others who work in courts, others who work with throughout Indian country, others who work with county organizations, nonprofit organizations, and we've just been thrilled to kick off this work in a really new way. And I want to lift up a couple things as we sort of round out the day in terms of what we've been trying to do here. And I thought I would do it in the context of two little stories. First of all, my apologies because I was stuck on a plane early this morning when I was supposed to be with you. And in the context of being on the plane, I was on an American Airlines relatively new airplane. And right in front of me was the state-of-the-art technology on navigating everything by touch screens. And I could, in the course of seconds, place myself somewhere in the country, look at it from above the plane, look at it in the context of the left side of the plane or the right side from the cockpit view. I could look at the velocity at which the plane was traveling. I could actually read the magazine on the flight. By flipping through it, I can expand and narrow all kinds of things related to the magazine. I could watch television, everything at my fingertips. And my thought was, what if that exact kind of technology was the way in which we approached child welfare in this country, right? These are not sort of new ideas. Technology and innovation exists all around us. We see it in ordering our pizzas, we see it in ordering boxes from Amazon, yet the child welfare field and the social sector has struggled with this. So this virtual conference and this virtual expo is trying to say not only how are you learning together and how are you sharing amongst what you are doing in the country and territories and across the country, but in fact, how do we learn more effectively together? How do we use the very tools and technology of social media, which has often bypassed the social sector and child welfare specifically, in a brand new way, and to leverage those tools in a much more compelling way, for example? How do we use the very technology that was on that flat screen in that plane for everyone to look at in terms of knowing exactly how many kids are in care, exactly how many kids are transitioning to congregate care, as Brandon has talked about, or exactly what is happening in every step of the way of a child's life? That kind of urgency has to be created by us. That's not going to be handed down to us by any one person. It's going to have to be created by us in a very new way. And this expo is trying to test out those ideas, the chat features that have been used, the peer-to-peer learning that has been used, the way in which we've used discussions following the presentations are all ways that we need to be doing our work in a more regular way. And one of the things that I do as a father, which happens to be the hardest job I have in the world, is being father to my two boys, Adán and Mateo. And one of the things I've done for many years is I capture exchanges of conversations that I have with them or things I overhear, and I write them down, type them up on my phone. And I have them organized by year, and at the end of the year, I take out the dates and who said what, and I call it an ode to the year. And I want to lift up one example of an exchange on February 17th, 2013, where my oldest son, looking into a water fountain, says, "I wonder what all of their wishes were," looking at the coins. And I reply, "I wonder the same thing when I look into fountains." And then he says back to me, let's ask Siri, she will know. The point of this story and the point of the flight, right, is that for so many of our children and youth, technology is not a new thing. They are born into a digital world. My sons were able to operate phones and all of the equipment on television because that's a way in which it was normal to them. And the normalcy issues that have been discussed and our work around preventing sex trafficking and ending sex trafficking in this country has to use those tools in new ways. But guess what? Just the way in which we heard from Brandon, that it's critical to talk about compassion and love and empathy and really thinking about this work, that is not hard for our young people to do because they are experts in their experience and they know this because they've lived it. No one else can tell our young people and our young adult consultants who have been with us today exactly what they've experienced because they know it in a way that no other adult and no other person in charge of these systems could possibly understand unless they've gone through it themselves. So we have to be even more thoughtful and more creative and more innovative in taking the tools that exist in so many other sectors across our world and applying them to our field. It is on us, the adults and the managers and the leaders, whichever part of the organization that you are in, to take up these tools. It is incumbent upon us because our young people deserve nothing less. The expectation that a young person should language and care or be moved from home to home, as happens over and over, is unacceptable. And there is not one single outcome or result of well-being of any young person who has aged out of foster care that tells us by the scientific literature and by the evidence that placing a young person in foster care and letting them live there is better off than not. And let's be clear about the data. When kids are in foster care and they languish there, 1, they are more likely to be behind in terms of their grade level reading. 2, they're most likely to be able to not graduate from high school on time or with their peers. 3rd, they're most likely to age out and not have a job or become homeless. 4th, they are more likely to become pregnant, and not when they want to be, but because of circumstances. These are the kinds of outcomes that we see over and over and over. So the time is now to think differently about how we are providing services for young people in this country, because the child welfare system as we know it has been deeply broken from the very beginning. So this expo today, lifting up normalcy, lifting up how to end sex trafficking, are pieces of a much larger puzzle. We're going to continue this kind of work because it is incumbent upon us to be much more creative about how we engage you across the country. We won't always be able to have presentations and conferences where thousands of people gather in one room. We'll still do that because that's actually a great way to engage with each other. And no technology can ever replace the human heart. And that's the final message I want to share with you, which is as we are thinking about how we are going to respond to an ever-changing technological environment and integrating components of innovation in our work, there will be critics who say, well, technology is going to replace the human being. The fact is that it never will, because systems and institutions and technology do not raise children. Families do. Families who care for them and who love kids. Families oftentimes by biology or by blood, families by kin, families by construction and by choice. And our system has to make sure that every single day we are lifting up what we have heard all day long from people like Brandon. We have to be more loving, more empathetic, and more caring in the way we deliver services. And they should not have to wait for us to have to change that. We are grateful to the Center for States for their leadership in helping organize this. We are grateful for the staff at the Children's Bureau who's trying to take this new way of engaging people across our country and in territories in a really powerful way. We're grateful to all of the consultants who have helped us put on today's production, but especially those young adult consultants and the voice of young people who time and time again in my role in traveling the country teach me more than any other person ever teaches me. And if we listened more closely and we are intentional and disciplined about integrating their work into our work, our system will be much better off, because at the end of the day, we don't want another child in child welfare. We know we can do better, and our children deserve nothing less. So thank you so much for joining us today, and I'll turn it over to my colleague, Rosie Gomez.
Rosie Gomez works with the Office on Child Abuse and Neglect.
This brings us to the close of our Child Welfare Virtual Expo. So this was an exciting day filled with excellent presentations, virtual chats, information sharing, and peer-to-peer exchanges. The expo showcased the innovative use of technology to engage audiences across the country and to build knowledge, share information, and really forge connections. So we hope that the information and insights that you gain today will help you better address the sex trafficking and normalcy provisions in Public Law 113183, and to answer the questions, how can we better serve young people, and what do we need to do differently? So several themes were reinforced today, including the power of listening to the voices of youth and survivors, the importance of trauma-informed approaches to screening and identification of child and youth victims of sex trafficking, the valuable role that data can play in informing strategic responses, the potential for meaningful collaboration, and the link between promoting normalcy and preparing youth for healthy futures. So I just want to thank all of the presenters for their thoughtful presentations. And as the commissioner mentioned, we want to thank all of those behind the scenes, especially Rebecca Huffman with the Children's Bureau, and Jennifer Marcelli and Elizabeth Eaton from the Center for States. But I've been behind the scenes all day, and there's been a lot of work that's happened. So again, we want to thank everybody.
Rosie describes day of operations that are no longer available.
And as we end today, we encourage you to complete the last evaluation. Your feedback is helpful to the Children's Bureau as we think about a future virtual event. And feel free to continue to network in the lounge. As the presenters in the last panel mentioned, they will be available for the next 15 minutes, as well as our commissioner, to answer any questions. And the Center for States will send an e-blast to all participants once the archived session videos are posted on the website. For those of you that have registered for the National Conference on Child Abuse and Neglect, we hope to see you there to continue the learning opportunities, and that'll be August 31st through September 2nd. So as we close, on behalf of the administration on children, youth, and families, I want to thank you for your continued work to help strengthen children, families, and communities.
To search for Child Welfare Virtual Expo activity on Twitter, use hashtag CWVE. The Virtual Expo is presented by the Children's Bureau and the Capacity Building Center for States.